I'd wanted that Brexit referendum, and I'd fought for it for about a quarter of a century. And you know what? In the face of the global elites and the big businesses and everybody lining up to say that if we dared vote Brexit, ruin, plague and pestilence would come upon us, we still defied them and we won. And I have been taking the view, I think of all leavers, since the referendum, that we've had a vote, it wasn't the best of three. Hey, can we please accept we've taken this fork in the road, and will you please, our government and parliament, get on and carry out the will of the people? So the last thing I've ever wanted is another referendum on this issue. But I began to realise since Monday, when I went to meet Mr. Barnier, that it's just not as simple as that. Because my pessimism in that meeting with Barnier, realising he's not going to give us a good deal, was of course backed up by the three leading British businessmen who went to see him yesterday. We are not going to be offered a grown-up, rounded trade and services deal. Whatever gets put to Parliament is now, I think, likely to be rejected. Even if there was a majority in Parliament that would have voted for Brexit before the general election in June, now there are actually more Tory rebels who would vote against their government on this than there are Labour MPs who would defy their own side. I fear that Parliament will reject any deal, and I fear that Parliament, both the Commons and the Lords, may well do everything they can to put us through a second referendum. And bear in mind the timeline on this. This deal with Europe has to be finished by October. It could be before the end of this year that Parliament is voting on the final deal. So much as I don't want a second referendum, I have now begun to open my mind to the possibility that this may be forced upon us. I've seen the Labour Party completely change its position. I mean, so much so that if we didn't have a referendum in the next couple of years, I can actually see them fighting the next election with a promise to give us one. I am saying this to leavers. Please don't be complacent. Please don't think, because we won this great historic referendum, that it's all over. Look at what's going on with the Remain side. They're on the streets of London every day with their flags and their leaflets. Where's the Leave side? Well, many of the most prominent players are now in government, and so actually are bound by collective responsibility. Most of the Leave organisations have wound down. We don't even have a coherent voice of leavers working together from a business perspective. I'm doing this today. I'm saying, please get yourselves ready. There may well be a second referendum on this. This is meant to be actually a wake-up call to leavers. I genuinely believe we must prepare for the possibility of a second referendum, whether we like that prospect or not. So, we've heard today a lot of comment from Tory MPs and others who are horrified by the prospect, because, of course, they fear it would rip their party apart. Similarly with the Labour Party, that may well put the parliamentary Labour Party totally at odds with a third of their voters in the country. I've written about this on the Telegraph website. I haven't reached this conclusion comfortably or easily, but my meeting with Barnier convinced me we are not going to get a good deal, and Parliament isn't going to accept it. And don't forget, they've won that concession, haven't they, to have a meaningful vote on whatever the deal is. Please don't think, if Parliament rejects the deal, that we just crash out on WTO lines. That's the optimistic view put out by leavers. Sorry, folks, our political class won't let us get away with it. So there may well be one last dramatic battle in all of this that will take place. And if it does, I'm confident that actually the Leave side would win by a bigger majority, and we'd be able to send Blair, Clegg and Adonis into outer space. So let's hear what you've got to say. Do you think, like me, that the Leave side should be beginning to plan for a second referendum? And if you do, call me on 0345 6060 973, or perhaps you think, no, it's a waste of time, we've won, it's all going to be fine, then text to 84850. Or perhaps you're a Ramona who actually can't believe that for the first time ever you agree with something that I'm saying, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me on Facebook and, of course, comment there too. Jean is a new caller to the show. She's calling from Canterbury. Good evening, Jean.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you. Yes, I'm a first-time caller, so I want to say hello. I'm also a Brexiteer. I've got several points to make about this. I do not think we should have another referendum. We've already voted once. How many more topics of different discussions are we going to have in this country for it to be a case of, have we now got the right answer and upset people and all this sort of thing? No, I think it should be as it is. What we should have done back a long time ago, 18 months or however long it's been since we first knew, is I think that Theresa May should have set up a panel, literally about 3 or 4 people who are the brains of the country, perhaps even yourself included, because you were a staunch Brexiteer and know about government and what goes in, but say like the CEO of Next or even Lord Sugar, even somebody from Fisheries and all the other different departments, all get their heads together. They're used to negotiating on a day-to-day basis and could go in hard. I think that she should have just set up that panel, let them get on with it, let her do the rest of the country, okay, to sort out things of more consequence, like the NHS and all these other departments that she's got.
No, Jean, there is an argument. There is an argument, Jean, that Brexit is taking over the government. They haven't got time to do other stuff, and I understand what you say.
That's what I'm saying. She should have done that ages ago. The other thing I wanted to say, I was just trying to get on the other day onto your show to ask you to have taken a question. I don't know whether this has actually been asked of Barnier, was to find out what the terms of exit were for the Canadian government when they went out, whether we could have had something similar.
Jean, that's a different issue. The Canadians have a deal on goods but not services, which I'm struck is what Barney is offering us. Jean, back to your first point, the most important point. I understand what you say. We voted. We should leave. But, Jean, what I'm saying to you today is, what if a second referendum is forced upon us? Shouldn't, Jean, people like you and I, on the Leave side, prepare for that possibility?
Well, as I said, I feel so strongly about this issue. I even said to my partner, I feel like writing to the Queen about all the points I want to make all about this, because I'm up to here with it. The fact that we've had this referendum, we've got a clear thing. Why can't we just leave it there for once? How many more referendums?
I know, Jean, Jean, I don't want another referendum, but I fear it's going to be forced upon us. I thank you for your call and for your passion. And you can write to the Queen, and you can call LBC, and you can tell your neighbours and shopkeepers. But the trouble is, it's Westminster. It's the House of Commons and the appalling House of Lords who, frankly, could impose this upon us. I get told by text, don't you dare put us through another referendum. I don't want to, but what if it's forced upon us? Shouldn't Leavers start to get themselves organised? Shouldn't we start to lobby MPs, particularly in Leave voting constituencies? Corbyn and May cannot come out and say they agree with you, or can they? Well, the government, number 10, has responded by saying there won't be another referendum. Of course they have. Ian from Frinton says, fab on the right stuff today. That's the programme I was on Channel 5 this morning. Yes, second referendum to shut all these losers up once and for all. Well, that was kind of one of the things I joked about this morning, that actually if we won a second referendum with a bigger majority, maybe that would be the referendum to end all referendums. I don't know. I don't want it, but I fear it may be coming down the track. Harry is calling from Nottingham. Good evening, Harry.
Good evening, Nigel. I heard your remarks today, and I couldn't believe just how naive you were, because we had a referendum 2 years ago that settled the question, Remain and Leave. There have been politicians from the Remain side who want to overturn the result. By your statement, what you did today, you've just given them ammunition, and this isn't the first time you've done it. I remember reading your book that you wrote 3 years ago, and you said in that book that if you lost your seat in South Thanet, you would resign as UKIP leader. That was foolish as well, because that gave the ammunition to the other side to determine to beat you. So we shouldn't be preparing for a second referendum.
We shouldn't.
Because no, we shouldn't, because the referendum, the government said in the leaflet that was posted through that door, that would be the final decision, and the government would respect that decision.
And you trust them, Harry, do you?
It would cause, in my opinion, the MPs won't have the bottle to do it, because it would cause such a constitutional crisis that if they went against what this referendum was, I would fear what would happen. Secondly, if there was a second referendum, and the only time I'd be prepared to have a second referendum, remaining in the EU shouldn't be on that ballot paper. What should be on the ballot paper is whether we accept the government's deal, or if we don't accept it, we go on to WTO rules. Because the Lib Dems say, well, we chose our destination, we chose the cause of destination to go on, so we should set the terms that we should leave on it. Well, actually, they're kind of going against what they're saying, because remaining in the EU was ruled out in last year's referendum. If you're going to have a referendum, you should decide how you should leave the EU. So,
Harry, the problem is, Harry, it won't be us making these decisions. You know, and I'll tell you what would be naive, Harry, really incredibly stupid and crazily naive, and that would be to allow the Remain organisations between now and the end of the year to build up war chests of millions and millions of pounds, to get their street campaigns going all over the country, to build up their social media profile, to, as they do every week, get their negative business messages going out through the media. What would be naive, Harry, is if we, the Leavers, continue to be fractured, splintered, not campaigning, not putting out messages, not pressurising MPs. That, Harry, in my view, would be naive, because I think the best way to protect our great victory is to be prepared if they come at us again.
But by making those remarks, right? You know, we spoke about when Trump retweeted Britain First, and the media did the wrong thing by promoting Britain First. By what you've just done today, you have promoted the idea that there may be a second referendum. Don't give these people airspace. Ignore them.
What I've tried to do, Harry...
Just let them carry on.
Harry, what I've tried to do, I promise you, for the last 6 months, I've met several people, a lot of people, who played prominent roles in the Leave campaign. I've urged a number of business leaders, please can you come together as a coherent group and start countering the Goldman Sachs and organised stuff that we see in the press every week. And Harry, I completely and utterly have failed, I would admit to you, to bring anyone together, to give any coherence to any sense of a Leave campaign right now. So I've done it in public, and I hope it gives everyone a kick up the backside and we start to get ourselves prepared. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. I've opened my mind to the fact that a second referendum on the European question may be coming. It's never what I've wanted, but I fear that we now have a Parliament, we now have a Commons and a Lords, where Brexit is without doubt in a minority, and I'm concerned this could be forced upon us, and that the Leave side has made simply no preparations at all, because we're so busy saying, we won, it's over, get over it, let's move on. I've been saying that. I've been saying that ever since the referendum, whenever I've heard Blair, Adonis, Clegg, any of them. But my meeting this Monday with Monsieur Barnier has convinced me we are not going to get a good deal, and Parliament is going to reject it. Sandra says on Facebook, if we have a second referendum, and we had a big Leave majority, it won't stop the moaners. It'll just make them worse. We'll be back to square one. No, Sandra, I disagree. I think a second referendum would be won with the Leave side with a bigger majority, and that, I think, would be the end of it, and we could send the Remoaners into outer space. That is my feeling. We'd settle it once and for all, if that's what we have to do. And similarly, Tony says to me on Twitter, what makes you think that if the Leave side win again, anything would change? Again, if you've won twice and you've won with a bigger majority, I do think that would be the end. What about the youth vote? Remain would make sure those youngsters too lazy to vote last time would sway it for them, says Becky. Well, Becky, you're right to say that the youth in this country voted to Remain, which is fascinating, because across the whole of the rest of Europe, it's the youth that want to leave the euro, and in Italy now, amongst the under-40s, pretty much a majority to leave the European Union. So, hey, there'd be lots of battles to fight. I understand that. I'd rather we weren't even having this conversation, but I really do fear what our career professional politicians will do to us. I hold them in such contempt that I do not trust them. And I genuinely believe they're going to force this upon us again. We mustn't get taken without some degree of preparation. Matt is a new caller to the show. He lives in Stoke-on-Trent. Good evening, Matt.
Hello, Nigel. How's it going?
Well, I find myself in an odd place, Matt, today, because I find myself saying something that I've been fighting against in my own mind for the best part of 18 months. But I just feel this could be forced upon us. We must be prepared.
Well, I find myself in a funny position as well, because I'm a Corbynite Labour supporter, so probably we don't see eye to eye on everything. But Brexit is one of those things that we do generally tend to agree on.
Yep.
What you've had to say for your career so far. What surprises me, I suppose, is that, from day one, since the referendum, we've known that the Remainers have been clamouring for a second vote. They've been saying all sorts of stuff. We were tricked by a number on the side of the bus and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
Matt, don't forget the Russians. Don't forget the Russians. They must have played a role in this somewhere,
Well, if things aren't going your way, you can always blame Vladimir Putin, can't you?
Absolutely.
But the thing that concerns me is that I feel that if people on the Leave side now start talking about the prospects of a second referendum rather openly as well, aren't we sort of giving oxygen to these people who want to force a second? Like, do you not feel that we're kind of adding to the momentum of that?
I do accept the risk of that, Matt. I do accept the risk of that. But against that, as I say, I've been trying for months behind the scenes to get business players and political players together to form a united campaigning group, a sort of Brexit means Brexit type group, to put pressure on MPs to start making the arguments. And Matt, I failed to get anyone together at all. So I'm hoping that by my saying, I fear that a second referendum may be coming, that we may just get some levers together, because we need to keep fighting for that victory. And it's often said, isn't it, the best way to preserve the peace is to prepare for the next war. And that's kind of how I feel about it, Matt.
I could understand that reasoning. There was just one thing I wanted to clarify. I'd seen you speaking on the Right Stuff earlier on today. Yep. And what I'd gathered from that interview is that perhaps you thought maybe the prospect of a second vote would be a good idea, sort of put the issue to bed. So.
What? No. The one good thing, Matt. The one good thing about it is it would give us the possibility of putting it to bed for a generation once and for all. But to be clear, Matt, I am not campaigning for a second referendum, but I've opened my mind to the possibility that it could happen.
Well, at the very least, then I'll say I agree with you that I don't want there to be a second referendum. But if it looks like it's likely, then probably best to be prepared at the very least.
Yeah, and so if it happens, Matt, will you and I find ourselves arm locked out there together campaigning for Britain?
What, Labour and UKIP standing shoulder to shoulder?
Yeah, could you do that to make sure Brexit happens?
Well, I'll tell you what, stranger things have happened, haven't they, Nigel?
They really have. Matt, great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. Nigel, we do need another referendum. Accept or reject the deal. The government cannot be trusted. Well, there are many that think the government can't be trusted, but it's not... I mean, although I've got big problems with the government and what they're doing, my real problem is I don't trust the House of Commons, and I certainly don't trust the House of Lords on this issue. Peter lives in Southampton. He's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, what do you think? Should the levers get ready, or is it all a done deal?
Well, I think you're quite right to suggest that a second referendum is a definite possibility. I think it's been on the cards for quite some time. Matt, from your previous caller, just stole my thunder a little bit.
Oh, did he?
Because it seems, a little bit, because it seems very inconsistent in what you said on the TV this morning and the tweet that you put out. Maybe, just maybe, we should have a second referendum, which is very different to what you're saying now.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Look, rather than being in denial over this, okay, Peter, I've been in denial over this. I've been shouting at the Ramonas and saying it isn't going to happen. There won't be a second referendum. It's all going to be okay. And I'm now thinking, do you know what? If they force this upon us, let's get prepared for it. Let's take it on. Let's not whinge. Let's win it by a bigger margin.
But the story you've created isn't that. The story that you've created is, I think we should have a second referendum.
Of course.
Nigel Farage, all the news.
Peter, of course.
Aaron Banks,
of course.
He's tweeting today, Nigel is a visionary. He's ahead of the curve on this one.
Peter, that's what the media do. The media never, ever will take any nuanced argument. Evening Standard, front page, Farage demands second referendum. I don't. But I have opened my mind up to the fact that it may well happen. And if it does, let's do it, let's greet it, and let's win it.
So one journalist today brought up a quote that was attributed to you, and I never knew if it was true or not, but on the night of the referendum, you supposedly famously said that if the vote was 52 to 48, it would be unfinished business. And of course it was.
No, I said, Peter, I said there would be some in the Tory party who would go on calling for a second referendum, but in reality, I doubted we'd get one for another quarter of a century. And believe me, had Remain won, we would not be having this debate tonight. It's just because the establishment lost. But the trouble is, Peter, the establishment are in a majority in both Houses of Parliament.
I appreciate that, and I think you're quite right to say a second referendum is very likely, which personally I dread the idea of, because the referendum as a whole, I think, did such damage to us socially. No one's come back together. Both sides have got completely entrenched on their position. There's very little middle ground. I can't see how a second referendum is going to do anything but reopen all those wounds again, which is why I was staggered from that quote from you this morning.
Yeah. Well, Peter, as I say, I fear this is going to be put upon us. I hope I'm absolutely wrong. I hope that Brexit goes through and we leave on the 29th of March 2019, no problem. But I really have a great concern that whatever deal is agreed by Barnier will not be seen to be good enough by the UK Parliament. And I think that's exactly what Barnier and the European Union want. And if that sounds a bit conspiratorial, I don't care. That's what I believe after my meeting there on Monday. Peter, I thank you. I'm going to go to Steve in Red Hill, another new caller. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Nigel. Very nice to speak to you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think you've played a very shrewd move today. I think you need to regather the troops, and I think we have to be prepared for a second referendum, even though we don't want one. I was speaking to my sister-in-law today, and there's a lot of people that are still naive to what the EU is all about. And I think we need to gather the troops up together and get out there again and get the leave word out there.
Yeah, no, Steve, I think that's right. Do you know what? We have given these Ramonas, these professional career politicians, a free run for the last 18 months. You know,
we have it on the BBC, we have it on Sky, we have it all over the place.
It never ends.
No, it never ends.
It never ends, and their friends in business put out negative stories week after week after week. For the referendum, Steve, you'd go out on a Saturday and there'd be over 1,000 towns across the country where there'd be a stall and there'd be people from Leave.eu and Vote Leave out giving out leaflets, collecting email addresses.
I was an activist for the grassroots in Red Hill.
Grassroots out, yeah. But all of that stopped. All of that stopped.
There's nothing now.
And yet, Steve, I can tell you that some of the Remain organisations are out on Saturdays in London and Birmingham and elsewhere. So you're quite right, Steve. I am rallying the troops. That is exactly what I'm doing. I'm saying, leavers, this is a wake-up call. You know, if we do rally the troops, organise, start to pressure MPs, it may well be unnecessary, because Brexit may well go through. Parliament may well not force us to have a second referendum. But what if they do, and they're organised and we're not? That, frankly, would be absolute madness. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. I so distrust and dislike our career politicians in the House of Commons and the House of Lords that I fear they're not going to accept the instruction they got on the 23rd of June 2016. They will reject whatever deal Mr Barnier gives us, and they may well force us to have a second referendum. And so I've gone from a position of being in denial over it and saying there won't be a second referendum because there doesn't need to be, to one that says, you know, if they do this to us, let's embrace it, let's do it, let's go with it, and let's start preparing for it right now. And it's an interesting thought. What would happen? What would happen if Parliament forced the people to vote again? What would that do to people? Would it make them angry? Would it make them pleased? And I picked up a little piece of advice here. Now, Gunster Strategies, run by Jerry Gunster, based in Washington, D.C., they were the advisors to Leave.eu as they put together their bid to try and win the nomination to run the referendum. But his comment this afternoon is interesting. He says, in my 30 years of running referendum campaigns, any winning campaign that has been called for a revote, those second votes have matched or exceeded the original margin of victory. I concur with Mr Farage that the percentage that would vote to leave next time would be bigger if this issue was called for a second vote. So, you know, there's somebody who runs referendums in America all the way through saying if you force people to rerun a question, actually, they get pretty blooming angry that their government or parliament didn't listen to them first time round. Peter is calling from Battersea. He's a new caller. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Yeah, so, Peter, do you think there's a possibility that the House of Commons and Lords could force a second referendum upon us?
I would hope so.
You would hope
I really
so?
hope so. Yeah. I mean, I don't agree with anything that you say, other than facing up to reality. And the reality is that politicians need to keep the peace, frankly. And I've always been very pro staying in the EU. I run a business. I see the impact of the lack of confidence that's happening on the market today. My question was, and I said to your researcher, you said I've failed to get people to buy in, to commit, to support my cause. My question is, why do you think that is? Maybe it's because they don't believe in it as much as you do.
No, I think they do believe in it, Peter, incredibly strongly. And you know, you saw those three very senior business figures there at the European Commission yesterday drawing a conclusion from the meeting with Barnier that actually was even more pessimistic than the one that I drew on Monday. No, I think, I'll tell you what it is. The Leave side, and I was one of them until earlier on this week, the Leave side think we've won this great historic victory, and it's going to happen, and therefore we don't need to do anything about it. And I think that's wrong, because, Peter, I think that the Ramonas, call it what you will, are very organised, they're well-funded, they're out there campaigning every single day, and I am urging, and OK, you're not a Leave voter, but I'm urging Leave voters to be prepared, because we may well have a second referendum forced upon us. It's just as simple as that.
I think you're absolutely right. I do agree with you. I do agree with you that they do need to be prepared. You're absolutely right. But coming back to your point that you were talking about the statistician that was saying about people redoing referendum, I think the issue that we've got here is that the people that voted, I do think they voted with misinformation. I genuinely believe that. And I know that's easy for me to say that, but I genuinely believe, because everything that's come out afterwards, and I agree with you, Project Fear was bad. That's not a good way to do it. I totally agree with you. Negativity never wins any kind of deal. But I think there's enough come out of it for people who did vote to leave to say, hang on a minute, what happened to all those people? I mean, frankly, the people that were running the campaign, the way they ran away from it afterwards and the way that it disintegrated was frankly pretty disgraceful. Well, it doesn't matter whether you're voting for it or not.
Well, Peter, many of the leading voices in the Leave campaign are now in the cabinet. So, you know, that's kind of the way it worked out. So they hardly ran away. Peter, I thank you for your call. And I know that this week, we've had a lot of new listeners to the show, a lot of new people engaging. I can see that from the calls. I just want to say this to you, that, you know, I run this show. I've got my own opinions. You know what, not all, but you know what many of them are, and I believe them and hold them strongly. But the whole point about LBC is it is the one format in British politics where, rather than just journalists talking about politicians or journalists talking about journalists, you, the public, can get engaged. And within reason, provided you're polite, because we are before the watershed, you know, provided you're polite, you can say what you like. So please, if you think you're sitting there at home, you're in the car, wherever, and you think, you know, we've just turned onto this Farage bloke, he's talking complete and utter tosh. Well, it's very easy. You just ring 0345 60 60 973 and you can have your say, I promise you. Let's go to Benjamin, another new caller from Kings Langley. Benjamin, good evening.
Good evening. I just wanted to firstly ask you why, after Sheila Fogarty invited you on her show, you declined?
I declined about 28 media requests, Benjamin. I didn't do any today.
Oh, I mean, she said that she was in the studio with you and you declined. But anyway... No.
I declined Sheila Fogarty. I declined Ian Dale. I declined the LBC Daily Podcast and every other single broadcaster. You know, there are times when you've put something out there, let people think about it, let them kick it around, and I had the chance to come back tonight at 7 o'clock to talk about it and to write something for the Telegraph Online, all right?
Okay. No, I just in my head, I thought it was maybe that you needed the time to kind of think of something, you know, to say that was, you know, as disingenuous as most of the things you say are.
Oh, Benjamin. Oh, come on, grow up. Do you have a sense of... I mean, because, there's a lot of people want to get on this show, Benjamin. You got something sensible to say? Let's hear it, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you say sensible, but you're still using the word Ramona. But anyway, the point I wanted to make is you claimed today, or when you said on national TV, that you wanted to kill off the Remain parties, kind of Ramonas and all that sort of stuff. I'm a Remainer. I voted Remain in the referendum, and I did exactly what you said. If you voted Remain, the public have spoken, and you suck it up, basically. I did that. I've now accepted the result, and now all of a sudden you've done this U-turn, And if you had listened to Sheila's show earlier, there were a lot of people that were really big fans of yours that were really, really let down by you.
Of course, Benjamin. Of course, Benjamin, because they think I've opened a campaign for a second referendum. I haven't. I am preparing. I've opened my mind to the possibility that this could get forced upon us. I've come out of the denial that I think a lot of Leavers are in, where they think it's a done deal. I'm fearful, Benjamin. I'm genuinely fearful that the Commons and the Lords will force us to vote again, and I want Leavers to be prepared and organised.
Well, as you say, if you say so.
Well, I do say so, and I just think it would be a huge mistake. The other side are organised, they're funded. Happy word. Well, 3 or 4 of you have said, even if the Leave side win by 60%, it won't stop things. Actually, I think that it would. And I do accept the criticism from John that, by talking about this, by saying I accept the fact that it could happen, that it allows people like the Mayor of London to go on and argue for a second referendum. John, I do accept that. I do accept that. But, hey, they were talking about it anyway. Mr. Blair, others, Vince Cable we had in this studio, there's been a big campaign for a second referendum, and my fear is that when push comes to shove, when the chips are really down in Parliament, they will have a majority. That is my... Goodness me, I hope I'm wrong. I hope this country does not have to go through a second referendum. It's the last thing I want, but it could happen. Just look at the Labour Party. Look how Corbyn, running on a manifesto, leading the party, saying they would leave the European Union, the single market, and take back border controls. There aren't many Labour MPs saying that these days, are there? Gary on Facebook says, the terrible behaviour of EU dictators during the first round negotiations has certainly swung the Leave vote to a bigger margin, I would think. Gary, I agree with that. I also think that if you, and I get a text here backing it up, can we make sure in the next referendum that Remain means joining Schengen, the Euro, a United States of Europe and the European Army? And Gary, that's the other point, is that since the Brexit vote, Mr Juncker, the European Parliament, everybody has made it clear they are pushing on to a United States of Europe. I think it would be very, very difficult for the Remain side to convince Britain to go back into something that would mean a European army and the Euro. In fact, I'm absolutely certain we simply wouldn't do it. Paul is calling from Attleborough in Norfolk. Good evening, Paul.
Yes, good evening, Nigel. Hi.
Hello. So should Leavers prepare, or should we just say it's OK, we've won?
Well, I don't think there's a need for another referendum.
No. Nor do I, but there could be one.
Well, I need to ask you why. We've had the referendum.
Yep.
The result was to leave.
Yep.
If by any chance the government, the Parliament, either the House of Lords or the Commons, rejects any deal, then the result of the referendum still stands. So we are still leaving the European Union. So don't we just then have to leave on WTO rules?
Well, I thought that until last Monday, yeah. That was how I was thinking, Paul.
What's changed?
I was quite bullish about it, but I'm now beginning to see. I frankly believe that the European Commission, Monsieur Barnier, and the political establishment in this country are working together. And the idea that a rotten deal, Paul, gets rejected by Parliament and that we then just crash out on WTO rules, Parliament won't let that happen. They just won't let that happen.
But constitutionally, how can they stop it? Because the referendum result still stands. Because
they can vote for us to have another referendum, to revoke Article 50 and to have another referendum. And they could do that. Paul, I very much... Listen, I want to repeat this point to you. I've been in the same place that you've been in. We've done it, we've won, it's going to be OK. And I hope that's the case. But I have opened my mind to the possibility that that may not be the case, and I want us to be prepared.
OK, well, if they do that, that would be such an obvious travesty of democracy.
Yes.
And I think they'd have a problem.
Do you know what, Paul? So do I. So do I, and we could finish them off once and for all. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It is 7:45. I don't want another referendum, but you know what? There might well be one, because a lot of our political class, and I believe a majority in the Commons and the Lords, would like this to be the case. If it's going to happen, well, I'm now fully out of denial over this. If it happens, fine. we'll take it on and we'll win it, but we've got to start preparing. We've got, as Leavers, to start fighting back. And someone on Twitter agrees with me, saying it's good what Nigel has done. He has reignited the debate. Brexiteers need to be more proactive. The PM has to be held accountable. She needs to be kept in check. Others very worried and saying if Remainers won the second referendum, that would be 1-1, and that would inevitably lead to the call for a third referendum. Best to leave things as they are. I agree with you. I agree with all of you who want things left as they are, fearful that you open a can of worms, fearful. I mean, I do actually believe that Leave would win now by a much bigger margin, but fearful if that was not the case, this could engulf us for the next decade. I am not campaigning for a second referendum, but I've opened my mind to the possibility that it might well happen. Helen is a new caller from Watford. Good evening, Helen.
Hi, Nigel. You've just spoke about what I'm calling about.
Go on.
What if we lose the second one?
Oh, yeah.
That really, you're going down a dangerous path with this second referendum. If Leave loses,
yeah,
it would be chaos. So I agree with you. I mean, we would have civil riots. I agree with you rallying the troops.
Yeah.
Brexit needs to be fighting. We've gone far too quiet.
We sure have.
But don't rally the troops in the way of a second vote. Rally the troops in the way that we need to demand that we get a proper Brexit team, demand that we get a leader that the people voted for. We need a leader that we're happy with. Nobody's happy with Theresa May. Nobody.
No, I think that's probably quite true, although she's seen by some to sort of keep the peace in the Tory party between their warring wings. Helen, we've not even... I mean, all over the Midlands and the north of England and South Wales, you've got constituencies where people voted solidly to leave, and yet where the MPs are strongly Remain. I think the Leave side should be putting huge pressure on the MPs sitting in those constituencies. There's a whole lot to do. I understand your point that a second
You're correct. Rally the troops.
Yes.
Please stop talking about a second referendum.
Helen, I don't want Helen to refight. I don't want to refight a battle we've won. I'm just scared it may be forced upon us. I promise you, Helen, and I can tell the sincerity in your voice, I promise you, Helen, I'm not going to go out there and campaign for a second referendum. If I get a vote on it anywhere, I'd vote against it. But it may be forced upon us. That, Helen, is how disconnected our political class are with people like you.
How can they force it upon us?
They can force it upon us by voting it through the Commons and the Lords. They can force the government into doing it. It may not happen, Helen, but it makes sense. In every walk of life, it makes sense to take out an insurance policy, whether it's fire or theft, for your house, for your car, for whatever it is. It makes sense to have insurance. And our insurance as Leavers would be to start campaigning again, being active, putting massive pressure on the government and on our MPs, saying, give us the Brexit we voted for. And the Brexit that Helen in Watford most certainly voted for. And I thank you very much indeed for your call. There will be a second referendum, Nigel. It'll be called a general election. And the Leavers in the Tory party need to get a grip of Brexit negotiations and provide positive vision. If we go through to the next general election, having left the European Union, but still stuck inside a transition period, then I think there's a very strong chance that the Labour Party, certainly the Parliamentary Labour Party, in its current mood, would promise a referendum for us to stay part of the single market and the customs union. I mean, I just don't see this going away. The establishment doesn't actually feel like it's been beaten, and that's my concern. Nick is calling from Cheltenham. Good evening, Nick.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm afraid I am a Ramona, so sorry about that. Take up your point about a second referendum.
Yeah.
I do think if you do decide to, as you say, rally the troops, you need to probably get on with it, because unfortunately, there's no easy way to say it, a lot of them will start passing away.
Will they?
It generally tends to be an older vote that goes for Brexit. I still can't understand why we had a referendum in the first place, to be honest.
Well, that was to do with pressure on David Cameron and his fear that a significant number of his MPs would defect to UKIP. That is what prompted this.
That was what triggered it, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that we are where we are. I mean, you know, I don't wish to sound disparaging about the Brexit voters, but most of them are politically ignorant. So
Nick, you mustn't do that. You mustn't do that. You mustn't sound like, the career politicians that Brexit voters don't wash and they're thick and they're old and they're... I mean, come on.
Well, no, I disagree. No, I mean, you played a very good card on immigration. So you twisted the vote on Europe to immigration, and
wasn't much twisting needed, Nick, was there really?
Yeah. I didn't like that advert you put on about the migration, so I thought that was in very poor taste. But
well, the truth. Do you know what, Nick? The truth often does upset people. Let me ask you, Nick. So, do you want to join the euro?
No, but no.
No, I'm asking you. Do you want to join the euro?
People called expert. If you ask the average Joe in the street who voted Brexit, you'll get some waffle. They'll say, "Oh, we want our country back."
I'm asking you, Nick, from Cheltenham.
Nobody knows what I'm interested in.
Nick, do you want to join the euro? Do you want to join the Schengen area? Do you want to join the European army? Do you want to be part of the United States of Europe?
Do you know what? I don't know the answers to those questions because I haven't got the expertise in that area. So I allowed the decision to be made by the politicians that I vote for.
OK, but if there was another referendum, Nick, it'd be put back to you. I mean, one thing's very interesting. I tell you this, Michel Barnier said to me, we were talking about the Europe they're creating, he said to me on Monday, this is not a federal Europe, it is a unified Europe. I said, Monsieur Barnier, I couldn't agree more. A federal Europe would imply that member states could make their own laws over a whole variety of things. This is a unified Central Europe, where the laws are made by people. It's very difficult to get around. Nick, I thank you. I'm going to take one more caller, because there's loads of you that want to call. Seb is calling from Manchester. Good evening, Seb. I'm putting the proposition that there could be a second referendum forced upon us, and that Leavers need to wake up to that.
I actually agree with you. I've gone on a little journey this morning. I started off seeing your little clip and thinking, what are you going on about? But actually, as I've thought about it throughout the day, I've come around to your way of thinking, and I think that as a Leave voter, the campaign for the second referendum started the day after Brexit, really, or the day after the referendum. It's plain for anyone to see. It's really the case that the track record of the EU is that they get their way. France, Netherlands were ignored. Ireland were made to vote again.
Yep.
So we need to prepare in terms of what we think that the Remain campaign is going to do. They're not going to try Project Fear again because they know it didn't work. They can't say that we're going to be, £500 million worse off by 2030. We'll see through that. So they're going to be much more intelligent, much more logistical support. And so we need to think about what we're going to do, because otherwise we're going to have a Brexit which is built based on sand, and we need more of a foundation. So I think that's what you were trying to get at. But what do you think?
I have to say, Seb, that frankly, those that have campaigned for Leave are now disparate. There is no organised campaign of any kind. There is no collective joint business voice. Many of the leading voices for Leave are now cabinet ministers. UKIP at the moment are, whilst they're there in the opinion polls at 5% or whatever, but they're not posing the kind of threat to Labour or Conservative that they were at one point. They may do again, who's to say? And Seb, I just think the Leave side need to up their game and keep this campaign going. We have won a great victory, but hey, you know what? It's not all over. Seb, I thank you. I'm fearing one last great final battle, one last confrontation. Maybe the referendum to end all referendums. I don't know. I don't want it, but I've changed my mind since Monday. I now begin to think that it's a real possibility. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Coming up tonight at 10, it's Ian Collins. But up next and continuing with this conversation, it's Clive Bull.
Yes, we're going to take you on with this conversation. Nigel, thank you, by the way.